to the educatorium, euphorium, emporium for idea linoleum. Hey everyone, this is going to be kind of quick, but I want to get it uploaded because I've had many a video that's been rendered irrelevant for it resting too long in the annals of uploading. So Jon Stewart had Judge Andrew Napolitano on his show today, and Napolitano was the host of Freedom Watch on Fox Business Network and Fox News' senior judicial analyst. And Napolitano was on to promote his new book, Why It's Dangerous to Be Right When the Government Is Wrong, The Case for Personal Freedom. And I've argued a lot with my left-wing grandfather, who's a state rep in New Hampshire, and I was amazed when my mom called me down to see this clip because Jon Stewart made almost the exact same arguments that my grandfather's made against me a million times. So I'm going to respond to these arguments quickly, and hopefully I'll upload this before it becomes irrelevant to debunk these points. So what Napolitano is basically arguing in this video is that government is the antithesis of liberty, and politicians spend more time avoiding the Constitution than upholding it. And so what Stewart says is that whereas Napolitano sees the government as an infringer of liberty, Stewart sees the government as an enhancer of freedom. Roads, infrastructure enhances freedom, he says. A social safety net enhances freedom. An army enhances freedom. So government programs actually don't destroy freedom, they enhance freedom. There's a great quote from Henry Hazlitt when he's talking about Keynesian economics, and he says, "How wonderful is the Keynesian world! The more cake you eat, the more cake there is to eat. The more you spend, the more money there is to spend." That's pretty much the argument Stewart is making here, that the more freedom the government takes away, the more freedom people have. It actually enhances freedom. Now, let's leave aside the army and roads, because even most libertarians support that. And even though this idea that government programs equal liberty isn't true, it isn't new either. Back in the 1930s, FDR wanted to have a second Bill of Rights, which included right to decent housing, food, a job for all, a living wage. But the irony of this is that the welfare state is directly opposed to freedom. I don't really like using the term freedom because it's been so abused, but it's what Napolitano and Stewart use, so I'll just use it as well. The welfare state is based on the whole notion that you can only enjoy freedom when you're successful. You can't suffer from freedom when you're failing. Think about it. The more power you give the government to take care of you, it must necessarily infringe on your liberty. We can see this already with people on welfare. A couple years back, there was talk about the government not allowing people on food stamps to get soda and junk food. Why? Because the purpose of food stamps is to keep someone healthy, and because they can't afford enough food. So why should they be buying junk food? Well, people who buy food for themselves are allowed to buy junk food, even though it's changing because of the whole obesity issue. But we can see in that example that if the government is allowed to take care of you, it must take away your liberties to keep down costs and to keep the taxpayers happy. One big boogeyman that is a perfect example of this is rising healthcare costs. It's the rationale behind higher food taxes, click it or ticket, motorcycle helmet campaigns, all this different stuff that infringes on liberty. Why? Because we have a form of socialized medicine in America where if someone can't afford to have their injuries or their obesity taken care of themselves, the taxpayers are going to end up footing the bill. The government must say that you cannot ride without a bike helmet, you can't eat this, because you're our responsibility. And think about it, if the government is acting as a parent, which is something that George Lakoff, who's a progressive linguist, says is the progressive view, that the government is essentially a parent will restrict you from doing things because it's in your best interest. The government is the same way. If you're costing too much and you're their responsibility, they're going to restrict your liberty. So the welfare state is directly opposed to individual liberty and freedom. Then Jon Stewart goes on and says to Judge Napolitano, you know, are we a society? Are we a collective in a way? The success of people is built on the hard work of others. So why should we hang the losers in a free market out to dry? What are we going to do with the losers in a free market? And this is just a bogus argument. That argument he made about, oh, so the success of one person is built on the hard work of another. Well, for example, Bill Gates at college used to go and work on computers so he gained knowledge in it. But the computers were not furnished so Bill Gates could gain the knowledge to create Microsoft. The computers were furnished with the intention of making a profit. It just so happens in a free market that if you pursue your self-interest, you help others as well. Bill Gates, using IBM or whatever brand computers, because IBM created them for a profit, allowed him to launch Microsoft and improve so many other people's lives through his company paying wages to them, through his company increasing efficiency of other companies, whatever. And now people who build off Microsoft for their own self-interest are benefiting others. It's the way the free market works. It's nothing collective or socialistic about it, and it's a complete fallacy to argue like that. Also, losers in a free market. What do we as a society do to losers in a free market? Why would a collective response be mobilized for an individual failure? It doesn't make sense. If we accept the premise that individuals are responsible for themselves, why does the collective take care of them? It'll lead to dependency, it'll lead to economic breakdown, it'll lead to a host of other evils, economic, political, moral, social, that we just don't want to get into. And the free market is the best way to organize a society and run a society. What will happen to losers in free markets? Well, I personally think, and I know there are some libertarians who would disagree with me, that we should have some form of unemployment insurance. At a certain point, it does become a disincentive to work, but I think we should have some form. But talking about the free market in such a controlled economy setting we have today, and then progressives treat the problems of our society, which are caused by government, as if they're caused because there's not enough government, it's just a fallacy. Under a true free market, the conditions of our economy would so be changed for the better that we just can't even talk about what's going on today in the frame of reference of a true free market, because it would look so different and so many of the problems today would be essentially erased. So the answer to that question, what should we do with the losers in a free market, should be, well, we should free up the market, and that way there'll be less losers. There is empirical evidence. Economics is a much more solid science than many would want you to believe, that prove there are ways to lower unemployment, raise wages through the free market, and the government actually hurts in a lot of ways that progress. I know I'm kind of rambling, but I just want to get this done with, and I haven't planned this out very much. The next point Stewart makes is that, well, you keep talking about the government as if it's some kind of alien beast that is visiting evil upon us. And we are, in a representative democracy, we are the government. We vote in certain politicians to work in our self-interest, and of course there's going to be corruption, of course they're going to make mistakes, but is the government really truly evil? And I don't think I'd necessarily refer to the government as evil, but like so many other leftist ideas, this relies on the fallacy of perfect conditions. Yes, if people were optimally engaged in democracy and they carefully analyzed each candidate, looked through all their history, and if politicians weren't so corrupt and didn't try to cover their tracks and hide things from voters, and if the media was doing its job correctly, and so many other conditions that had to be met, then yes, we would have a truly representative democracy that looked after our self-interest. Lindbeck has a great saying. He said, if we listed the accomplishments of career politicians next to their names, they would lose every election. And because these perfect conditions are non-existent, it's even more ridiculous when Stewart interrupts Napolitano and says, no, we don't live in a tyranny of democracy. But because the government so routinely flaunts the limits that were put in place by the Constitution, now we truly do live in a tyranny of democracy. Because whatever the majority of Congress or the Supreme Court or the electorate decides, it's made into law and it's all hunky-dory. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, things that are anathema to challenge, programs that are popular and might even do a lot of good. Where is it in the Constitution that the government can administer a retirement system? So Stewart's points are just completely wrong on this subject of democracy and democratic tyranny. And there's two more points Stewart makes that I want to quickly address, and I know I'm rambling and I see I'm running out of tape, so I gotta finish this up quickly. But he says, well, sometimes in order to preserve liberty, we've got to raise an army or build a wall on the border. Yeah, no one's contesting that. An army, I mean, now it's being abused as well, but ideally an army should be to protect against foreign invasion and foreign threats, to protect our liberty and property. And so he's actually almost arguing against himself, because the thing he specifically pinpoints, the army, is to protect liberty and property and is in line with libertarian ideals, as opposed to social programs which are not protecting liberty and property. In fact, they infringe on liberty and property. And the last point he makes is, Thomas Jefferson said, and this is one of Napolitano's favorite quotes, that the government that governs least is the one that governs best. And he said, well, we tried that under the Articles of Confederation, and we chose the Constitution instead, which allowed for bigger government. If you read the quotes of the fathers of the Constitution and the people who were around the Constitution, they were deathly afraid of government, and they hated the idea of the government stealing liberty and property from its citizens. They knew the government had a tendency to do that. And I'm not going to go into the quotes right now because I'm running out of time and I really have to stop. But the point is that Stuart's history is faulty. The Constitution was not created to give a bigger government with social programs, and its founders did not want to create a large bureaucratic welfare state, corporate or individual. Anyway, Jon Stewart is dead wrong on this issue. Napolitano is right. He's making arguments I've heard a million times before. I hope I've convinced you that they're wrong. And free markets rock, government intervention knocks, and the price system barriers making the situation hairier. I know I've been rambling, but so long.